This is Dave Tate with another edition of Table Talk. First question today comes from Chris, and what Chris is asking is, he said that I mentioned in a previous video that I could take any program and turn it into a beginner, intermediate, or advanced program, and he was asking in what ways would I go about doing this, what specific things would have to change in the program to make it lean more towards a beginner or an advanced lifter. A lot of things will change. I mean, the program is the program structure. It's how it's set up. It's the template that's behind the program. It's the methodology. So you can have a block style program that's set up for a beginner, intermediate, or an advanced. You could use a conjugate type program set up for a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. You can have, any host of programs set up geared for whatever skill level that you have of a strength athlete. What's going to be the differences will be obviously the intensity or the percentage used. They're going to be somewhat different because the lower the scale, the less you can actually the lower and the higher the scale, the less you can really rely on the actual percentage. The beginner lifter can't really train so much, in my mind, on straight percentages of the main lifts, say 60% for 3 sets of 5 or however it's going to be structured, because the 60% isn't really their true 60% because their technique's so bad, their strength isn't really developed or coordinated efficiently. So, for example, you can take a straight beginner and have them do 60% of whatever you tested their 1 rep max at, and then have an intermediate lifter do that same 60% of their 1 rep max, and more than likely that beginner is going to be able to triple or quadruple the number of repetitions that the intermediate's going to do, because the intermediate's already learned how to lift with better technique and to put more muscle effort and more synchronization and coordination into each repetition. So that 60% is really more of a 60% than what the beginners is. The beginners is just kind of a guesstimated 60%. One little tweak in technique on a beginner can take them up 20, 30 pounds on their lift immediately, which greatly affects the percents. So percent-wise, the beginners would be programmed either at a little bit higher percent, or what I like to use is what's called a perceived max, where I'll have them work up to a certain point and then from there kind of guess based upon how they look if they're on a scale of a 6 to 10 or 8 to 10 or a 4 to 10, and each one of those numbers would relate to the percentage. So if they look like they're exerting a 6 out of a possible 10, well then I guess that that's probably around that 60% range. You can also do a perceived max where you have them work up, and as they're working up, you're having them basically trying to work up to a 1 rep max, but you're not going to actually have them do that. You're going to work up far enough that you can kind of guess that that would be their 1 rep max. So if it was a beginner and they hit 135 and they're starting to look a little shady and they go 155 and it really starts to look bad, and then you go 175 and from there they get it, it looks like they still got some left. In your mind, they could probably squat 225, but the form would be a complete wreck. So then you would base the percentages off somewhere between 200 and 225, and that would be called a perceived max. So that would be 60% of that perceived max. That's how I would focus on a beginner. The advanced is another odd end of the spectrum because the strength can be so high. For an advanced lifter, if you have an advanced squatter that squats 1,000 pounds, a 10% difference on that's 100 pounds. So you can't have them jump 5% each week on whatever wave or whatever cycle you're trying to do because they're 50% jumps. So the percentages as far as the jumps have to come down a little bit or have to be scaled down a little bit. Generally, when you're dealing with an advanced lifter, you'll have better communication and you'll be able to have more history to be able to know exactly how you're supposed to dial that in. Also with the advanced lifter, most of the breakdowns that you're going to see are also going to fall in the form of technical breakdowns, but they're going to be very, very minute and minor, but they're going to make a bigger difference. The intermediate lifters, really the group of lifters that can basically use percent training for any type of methodology to its most effectiveness, because they're falling right in that range where, you know, their technique is, say, 80%, you know, the coordination's good, the technique's good, everything's good to where the percentages will follow fairly well. And in most cases, though, they still need to back the percentages down based upon what you typically read, because the muscular coordination and the skill level isn't quite where they think it is. So that's one of the biggest differences. The second difference would be as far as the total training volume, as far as the number of sets and reps go. With the advanced lifter, that's going to be less because their workload's going to be greater, because it's going to take them more sets to work up to the actual weight that they're working with. With the beginner, I want to see a higher volume, because I want to develop more muscle mass in that range. So if they're not going to get more sets and reps out of their main exercise, it's going to be out of more supplemental type movements. The intermediate, basically most programs that you see are designed for the intermediate. So the intermediate is going to stay right about where it's going to be. Total workload is another thing that I look at, but I look at that mostly for the advanced guys than anybody else, because that's where the total workload can catch up and bite them in the ass and, you know, destroy a whole phase, block, or training cycle. So those are just some of the differences. I could probably go on for a half an hour to an hour about this, so I'll just keep it with that, as far as the main differences being, you know, the intensity, the volume, and the technique.